Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take that stack of source material you've shared with us, all those articles, the research, your notes, and we really plunge into them.
Yeah, the idea is to pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the key insights.
Exactly. Get you informed quickly, cut through the noise, maybe find some surprising connections in there.
Think of us as guides, really. We're navigating the info you've gathered, helping you see what's critical in the material you wanted us to explore.
Precisely. And today we're digging into something that feels, well, incredibly relevant for anyone building tech teams, especially as they grow.
Mm-hmm. That scaling piece is key.
We're talking about structuring modern tech organizations, the challenge of arranging teams, responsibilities, collaboration,
You can actually keep shipping good stuff, innovating, growing.
instead of getting totally bogged down in internal friction. Or worse, chaos.
It really is the fundamental challenge of scale, isn't it? When you're, say, 10 people. Structure's pretty informal. It just works.
Right, everyone talks to everyone.
But hit 50, 100, 500, those informal ways just, they break down. How do you stay agile? Keep communication flowing.
Keep everyone pointing in the same direction, even when the number of people and connections just explodes.
Yeah, that's the puzzle.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really get into your sources on this. We'll look at the models they discuss. Spotify comes up a lot, obviously.
Always does.
Platform teams, too, that's a big one. And the whole pods versus silos debate.
Uh-huh. The cross-functional team idea.
But we want to go beyond the buzzwords. Look at the common pitfalls, autonomy versus alignment. That's a huge tension.
Oh, yeah.
What key roles make it work, how things like remote work change the game, and maybe when should you even think about a reorg?
If ever.
Right. Ultimately, we want to see what your sources suggest is well, maybe not the single smartest way, but smart approaches to scaling engineering without everything falling apart.
Because, and this comes through loud and clear in the material you provided, this isn't just abstract theory.
No, not at all.
The structure you work in every day, it directly impacts how well your team collaborates.
Yeah.
Your velocity, how fast you deliver value.
Team happiness, morale.
Definitely. And whether the business can actually, execute its strategy, it really gets to the heart of how work gets done.
Okay, so let's start unpacking that. Maybe begin with the foundational principle that sets the stage for all of this.
Sounds good. Where do we begin?
Let's dive right into why org structure is, well, way more impactful than maybe people realize, especially when they're first scaling up. Your sources really hammer home this foundational idea.
And it starts with something almost legendary now, right? Conway's Law?
Conway's Law. Yeah, seems simple on the surface, maybe.
Deceptively simple, I'd say. But it's incredibly profound. And it just keeps proving true. Your sources nail it. The architecture of your software, it's going to end up mirroring the communication structure of the org that built it.
And it works the other way too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's often reciprocal, the way your organization is structured. That heavily influences the kind of technical architecture you end up building.
So, okay, let's say you have a front-end team, a back-end team, a database team. Pretty classic setup.
Mm-hmm.
And they mostly talk through tickets, maybe occasional scheduled meetings.
Right, formal handoffs.
Then you're likely going to end up with a system architecture that has these distinct, maybe rigid boundaries between those parts.
Reflecting the team divisions exactly. You might get chunky APIs, slow handoffs between those system components, because that's how the teams interact.
The org boundaries become the technical boundaries.
Wow. And the friction points in your human structure, or where communication is poor, those become integration headaches or brittle dependencies in the software itself.
Okay, and your source uses a really good contrast here, right? The small startup versus the scale-up.
It does. Think about that early startup, maybe 10, 15 engineers.
All in one room or constant Slack messages.
Exactly. They're all talking all the time. Decisions happen fast. Context is shared just by being there. Everyone kind of knows what everyone else is up to.
Yeah, finding out is instant if you don't.
And that low organizational friction, it lets them move incredibly fast. They can ship daily, react to feedback super quickly, pivot if they need to. Velocity is just naturally high.
Makes sense. No layers of management, no complex handoff procedures, no negotiating dependencies for every tiny change.
But now, scale that up. Hit 100, 200 engineers. Maybe they split into teams for different product areas.
Right. Seems logical.
But if you don't think intentionally about how those teams are structured, how they talk, how decisions get made across them, you inevitably create organizational friction.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Teams become silos. They work on conflicting things because alignment's weak. They duplicate work because Team A doesn't know what Team B is doing.
Or they block each other, waiting on dependencies.
Exactly. And that amazing startup velocity, poof, gone.
Releases slow down, bugs creep in, innovation stalls because just integrating a new feature becomes this huge ordeal.
That's the critical impact. Your sources really stress this. Org structure isn't just admin overhead. It's not just an HR chart.
It's fundamental.
It's maybe the biggest factor determining how well people can collaborate. Does the structure make it easy or hard for the right people to connect?
And it drives velocity, obviously.
And morale.
Yeah.
A structure that helps teams succeed, that's energizing. One that throws up roadblocks constantly. So demoralizing.
Right. And maybe the kicker here, the point your sources make right up front, you don't really get to choose if you have a structure.
Oh, absolutely not. You are always designing your org structure, whether you mean to or not.
So if you don't actively design it,
Then a structure will just emerge, organically, shaped by personalities, history, who shouts loudest, the path of least resistance for individual teams.
and that accidental structure is probably not the best one.
Highly unlikely to be optimal. Not for collaboration, not for velocity, not for building a coherent, scalable architecture. It's just the structure that happens.
So ignoring it means you get a structure by default, and it's probably suboptimal. That really frames why this matters so much.
Definitely sets the stage.
Okay, so structure isn't optional, it impacts everything. Let's get into the specifics. Your sources explore different models, right? And one looms large, the Spotify model.
Ah, yes. The Spotify model. For a while there, it felt like the answer for scaling agile development.
Everyone was talking about squads, tribes, chapters, guilds.
Absolutely. It became the default vocabulary for engineering reorgs. I bet most engineering leaders had that original Spotify engineering culture deck saved somewhere.
Guilty. It really did capture the imagination. So what did your sources say made it so appealing? What worked well, at least, for Spotify?
Several things. First, it promised that magic balance, autonomy, and alignment.
The Holy Grail.
Kinda, yeah. The core unit was the squad. Small, self-organizing, cross-functional team, like 6 to 12 people, focused on a specific mission or feature area.
And they had freedom.
A high degree of autonomy, yeah, to decide how to achieve their mission, including tech choices, so they could move fast on their piece.
Okay, empowered squads. But it wasn't just a free-for-all, right? You mentioned alignment.
Exactly. It had mechanisms for that.
Yeah.
Squads were grouped into tribes, collections of reloaded squads in a bigger product area.
Yeah.
That provided some coordination.
Tribes, got it.
Then you had chapters. These were really key. Chapters brought together people from the same discipline, like all the back-end engineers or all the QA folks, but across different squads within the same tribe.
Ah, okay, so they weren't siloed within their squad discipline-wise.
Right. They'd meet regularly, share knowledge, keep standards consistent, mentor each other within their craft.
So squads focus on the what's the product delivery. Chapters focus on the how the craft, but scoped to a tribe.
You got it. And then there were guilds, even broader. These were voluntary communities of interest that cut across tribes. Anyone interested in, say, accessibility or a new programming language or DevOps practices.
Could join a guild.
Yeah, to share knowledge and collaborate across the whole organization. Your sources highlight these guilds were great for spreading best practices organically, not top-down mandates.
So that combination, autonomous squads, coordinating tribes, craft-focused chapters, cross-cutting guilds, plus a strong culture.
Culture of trust, yeah. And good communication. That's what made it work well for Spotify at their specific time and scale.
Sounds pretty good. No wonder it took off. But your sources also say just copying it often didn't work out so well elsewhere. What went wrong?
Yeah, this is crucial.
Yeah.
One big issue, trying to replicate it at very different scales, especially much larger scales than Spotify was back then.
What works for hundreds might not work for thousands.
Exactly. The complexity just explodes. Managing dependencies, coordinating across tons of tribes, keeping chapters coherent. It can become overwhelming fast. The overhead scales nonlinearly.
Okay, scale is one factor. What else?
It required really mature leadership, not just executives, but EMs, tech leads within the squads and tribes, people genuinely comfortable, empowering teams, coaching, guiding through influence, not commands.
And the infrastructure needed to be solid too, right?
Absolutely. Robust CI/CD, good monitoring, self-service tools.
Yeah.
So squads could actually operate autonomously without waiting for central teams all the time. If you didn't have those, the autonomy could easily just become chaos.
Makes sense. You need the guardrails and the enablers.
And that leads to maybe the biggest reason replications failed. People fundamentally misunderstood it.
How so?
Many orgs just saw autonomous squads and thought, great, flat org, total freedom. They copy the boxes and lines, the names,
Squads, tribes.
but they miss the crucial connective tissue. The chapters for craft alignment, the guilds for shared strategy, the vital importance of culture, trust, mature leadership. They copied the structure, but not the underlying principles or the enablers needed to make it function.
They cargo culted it. Took the form without the substance.
Pretty much. So the big takeaway from your sources isn't Spotify model bad. It's don't just clone someone else's org chart from a slide deck.
Understand the why.
Understand the problems they were trying to solve. Autonomy, alignment, knowledge sharing. Understand the principles they used. Then adapt those principles thoughtfully to your own context. Your size, your maturity, your tech, your culture.
Adapt. Don't just adopt wholesale. Got it.
It's about tailoring the lessons, not just replicating a snapshot. The why and how matter more than the exact what.
That principle of adapting lessons feels really important. And speaking of structures for scaling, your sources also talk a lot about platform teams. This feels like a more current focus than maybe the Spotify hype was.
It certainly does. And the case your sources build for platform teams is really compelling as a core scaling strategy. They solve a problem that just inevitably crops up as you grow.
Which is?
Internal friction points. They just multiply.
Okay, internal friction. Like what specifically? Give me some examples.
Okay, imagine you've gone from maybe 2 product teams to, say, 20, each focused on a different part of the user experience.
Right.
Every single one of those teams needs common stuff to actually build and run their features. They need logging, monitoring.
Sure.
They need CI/CD pipelines to build, test, deploy code. They need auth systems, databases, storage, maybe shared UI components for consistency.
Okay, yeah, foundational things. And if every single team has to build all that themselves.
Reinventing the wheel, exactly.
Yeah.
Setting up logging, building deployment pipelines, figuring out auth flows over and over again.
Sounds like a colossal waste of time and effort.
It is. Your sources paint this picture. A dozen feature teams. No platform team. Each one build its own auth, its own logging setup, its own way to deploy to the cloud. You end up with 12 slightly different, probably inconsistent, maybe fragile versions of the same basic stuff.
Nightmare to maintain and super inefficient.
Totally. So the platform team steps in. Their job is to build and provide those common capabilities, like an internal shared services provider.
Okay, makes sense. But your sources really emphasize how these teams need to work, right? It's not just building stuff and throwing it over the wall.
No, absolutely not. This is the critical insight. Effective platform teams act as enablers, not gatekeepers.
Enablers, not gatekeepers.
Their mission is to accelerate the product teams, to empower them, make them faster, more effective, more focused on delivering unique user value.
So less submit a ticket and wait 6 weeks. More, here are self-service tools and APIs you can just use.
Exactly. Clear contracts, clear APIs for platform services. Product teams need to know how to use the logging service, the deployment pipeline, the auth system. It needs to be easy and developer-friendly.
Which leads to that other key idea from your sources.
Treating internal tooling like a product.
Right. That means thinking about users, needs, roadmaps, support.
All of it. Their users are the internal developers, the engineers, PMs, designers on those product teams. A great platform team spends time understanding their pain points, their workflows.
So they build stuff people actually want to use and can use easily.
Precisely. Services that are easy to find, easy to integrate, well-documented, well-supported. They often have a dedicated internal product manager gathering requirements, prioritizing based on what gives the most leverage to the rest of the org.
Because you could build the fanciest deployment system ever, but if it's impossible to use or has 0 docs,
nobody uses it.
Yeah.
Or they build their own shadow systems as workarounds. It becomes shelfware, brilliant, but useless.
So the real benefit comes when it's treated like a product, easy to consume.
That's where the leverage comes in. Your sources stress this. Done right, platform teams multiply the effectiveness of hundreds, maybe thousands, of product engineers. They handle the undifferentiated heavy lifting.
Freeing up product teams to focus on customer value?
Exactly. Massive operational and development leverage. But, and it's a big but,
only if they truly see internal devs as their customers.
only if they focus on enablement and ease of use. A platform team that becomes a bottleneck or whose stuff is hard to use loses all that leverage. They just become another source of friction. Their success is measured by the productivity and happiness of the teams using their platform.
That distinction, enabler versus gatekeeper internal product mindset, seems absolutely crucial for getting platform teams right.
Fundamental.
Okay, let's shift to another classic tension your sources explore. How do you actually group the people building the product? Do you put everyone needed, engineers, designers, PMs, together in cross-functional teams, often called pods?
Right, focused on a product area.
Or do you keep them grouped by discipline? All the back-end engineers together, all the designers together, functional silos.
It's a core org design question, especially once you're past that tiny startup phase. Your sources lay out the pros and cons pretty clearly.
Let's start with the case for the cross-functional pods. Mixed skills, one team, one goal.
The big arguments there, from your sources, are all about delivery and ownership. First, alignment. Everyone in the pod, engineer, designer, PM, QA, maybe is focused on the same user problem or feature.
Everyone rowing in the same direction.
Exactly. Communication about the product itself is super efficient within that pod. You avoid those slow sequential handoffs.
Like design throws it over the wall to engineering, front end throws it to back end.
Right. Instead, they collaborate continuously toward that shared outcome.
Which leads to the second big benefit, ownership.
Okay.
A cross-functional pod usually owns a piece of the product end to end. A feature set, a microservice, a user journey, design, build, test, deploy, maybe even operate.
Clear responsibility. That sounds motivating. It can be, absolutely. Fosters accountability.
Right.
So outcome alignment, clear ownership, powerful drivers.
Okay, sounds good. What are the downsides then? The risks?
The main risk your sources flag is potentially weakening technical depth or craft excellence within a discipline.
How so?
Well, if you only have, say, 2 front-end engineers embedded in a pod, they might get a bit isolated from other front-end engineers across the org.
Harder to share best practices. Stay aligned on architecture.
Exactly. Harder to mentor juniors in that specific craft, or have deep technical discussions with peers facing similar challenges elsewhere. They might become experts in their pod stack, but lose touch with the broader craft evolution.
Okay, makes sense. Dilution of craft. Now, what about the alternative? Functional silos. All engineers together, etc. What's the argument for that?
The primary benefit, and your sources support this, is maintaining that craft excellence. It's just easier to develop deep expertise, enforce standards, do discipline-specific reviews, mentor effectively, ensure technical consistency when everyone in that function is grouped together.
You build a strong community of practice for each discipline.
Right. But the arguments against it for product delivery are pretty strong too.
Yeah.
The big one is slow handoffs.
The waterfall effect.
Yeah. Product brief, design hands off to engineering hands off to QA hands off to ops. Each handoff is a potential delay, a point of miscommunication, maybe conflict.
And it fosters that us versus them feeling, right? Design complains about engineering complains about product.
Precisely. The structure itself creates boundaries that work has to cross, adding friction and muddying that end-to-end ownership of the outcome.
So, okay, pods optimize for delivery but risk craft. Silos optimize for craft, but risk delivery friction. It's a real tension. How do your sources suggest resolving it?
The consensus best practice seems to be finding a balance. The recommendation is typically use cross-functional pods as your main unit for delivery. Day-to-day building and shipping happens there, aligned around outcomes.
But you need something else too.
Yes. You intentionally supplement that pod structure with mechanisms to maintain craft development and alignment across the pods.
Like the chapters or guilds we talked about earlier, but applied here.
Exactly like that. Your sources suggest implementing something similar. Chapters, guilds, or just strong communities of practice. Forums where engineers from different pods meet specifically to discuss engineering standards, share solutions, explore tech relevant to their craft, do broader code reviews, mentor each other.
Cutting across the product pods horizontally.
Right. And same for design, product, other functions. The pod builds what the user needs. The community of practice ensures how it's built is high quality, consistent, and leverages shared knowledge.
So you get the delivery focus of the pod, but mitigate the risk of fragmentation by having that separate horizontal structure for craft?
That's the idea. You try to get the best of both worlds. It's not strictly either. It's about layering structures to serve both the vertical product need and the horizontal craft need.
Seems like a very practical way to handle that inherent tension.
It addresses both key aspects.
Okay, we've looked at models like Spotify, platform teams, the pod versus silo debate. But underneath all these specific structures, your sources keep coming back to this fundamental tension: autonomy versus alignment.
It really is the defining challenge, isn't it? When you're leading a growing tech org, you want to give teams autonomy.
Freedom to choose tools, processes, innovate quickly.
Right. Autonomous teams are often motivated, creative, efficient in their space.
Yeah.
If every decision needs layers of approval, you move at a crawl.
So autonomy unleashes speed locally.
But unchecked autonomy
Yep.
with no coordination. That leads straight to chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Every team doing its own thing, different directions, fragmented product, inconsistent UX, maintenance nightmare.
So you need alignment too, making sure everyone's generally pulling in the same direction, adhering to necessary standards.
It's that balancing act. Enough freedom to go fast, enough coordination to go together, and your sources list some very clear warning signs when that balance is off, when alignment is breaking down.
What should we look out for? What are the red flags?
Okay, one big one. Inconsistent tech stacks. Team A builds a service in Go with Postgres. Team B builds a really similar service in Python with MySQL. Team C uses Node with DynamoDB. And there's no clear reason why they're all different.
Creates tech debt, makes it hard to move people, complicates platform support. Yeah.
Exactly. Another classic sign. Duplicated work. Multiple teams building the same solution independently.
Because they didn't know someone else was doing it, or there wasn't a shared component.
Right. Massive waste of engineering effort. Your sources also call out shadow APIs or undocumented internal systems.
Ooh, sounds ominous.
It can be. Teams build internal tools or services for themselves. Other teams start depending on them, but they're not centrally known, documented, supported. They become hidden, fragile dependencies.
That feels like Conway's Law again, just organically grown, hidden connections.
It absolutely is. And one more signal. Endless, unresolved debates. Teams just spinning their wheels, arguing constantly about basic standards, architecture, tech choices, because there are no clear principles or ways to actually make a decision and move on. Decision paralysis.
Those definitely sound like symptoms of chaos. So if those are the warning signs, what do the sources suggest for achieving alignment without just crushing autonomy with top-down control?
They propose practices that guide decisions and coordinate, but gently. First up, clear engineering principles.
Okay, what are those like?
Not strict rules, but shared values and guidelines. Things like bias for simplicity, design for operability, secure by default, measure everything, automate tedious work.
So when a team faces a choice, they have guideposts.
Exactly. They can use the principles to steer their decision in a way that aligns with the org's values, even without direct orders. It's like giving everyone a compass, not turn-by-turn directions.
I like that. What else?
Lightweight architecture reviews. Keyword. Lightweight, not some massive bureaucratic gate for everything, but targeted reviews or discussions for decisions with big cross-team impact, high risk, or ones that set new patterns. The goal is feedback, shared context, alignment on critical stuff, not blocking progress.
Just enough process to avoid major divergence or disasters.
Precisely. And third, a big investment in internal documentation and shared objectives, like OKRs.
Documentation helps avoid the shadow APIs and duplication.
If it's good and discoverable, yes. Teams can find out what exists, and shared OKRs provide that alignment framework. Teams know the overall goals. They have autonomy on how they contribute, but the OKRs ensure everyone's efforts pull together towards strategic priorities.
Principles, lightweight reviews, docs, shared goals. It all sounds like alignment through shared understanding, not control.
And this leads to a really powerful insight in your sources. Alignment isn't the opposite of autonomy. Done right, alignment actually enables autonomy.
Wait, how? That seems counterintuitive.
Because if teams understand the principles, know where shared services are, can get quick feedback on big decisions, and see how their work fits into shared goals.
They can move faster within those boundaries.
Exactly. They operate with more speed and confidence. They don't waste time relitigating basic choices or worrying if their work will break something elsewhere. The alignment provides the clear lanes and guardrails that let decentralized teams innovate effectively without chaos.
So guardrails provide freedom by defining the safe space to run.
It's about building trust and shared understanding. That's the real foundation for empowered autonomy at scale. It reframes the whole tension.
That's a huge shift in perspective. Not a trade-off, but complementary.
When done well, yes.
Okay, so we've covered models, managed autonomy versus alignment, but your sources make another critical point. Org charts are just lines and boxes. It's the people and the roles that make it work.
Absolutely fundamental. You can draw the most beautiful chart, but if the key people aren't empowered or don't understand their role or aren't set up to succeed, the structure is just inert.
And your sources highlight specific roles that become really critical for knitting things together in a scaling org.
They do, especially roles focused on technical leadership and team enablement.
Let's start with the technical leadership side, the senior ICs.
Right. Your sources put a lot of weight on the staff, plus principal distinguished engineer roles. These are folks who stay deeply technical, often still coding.
But their impact goes way beyond just one team.
Far beyond. Your sources call them the technical glue. They connect the dots technically across multiple teams, sometimes whole areas of the company.
What kind of things do they do?
Driving complex cross-team technical projects, aligning architecture across different domains, mentoring other engineers on deep technical stuff, tackling those really thorny, ambiguous problems that don't fit neatly in one team's box. They provide technical leadership without being managers.
So they're vital for technical coherence across the system. What about the managers?
Engineering managers. Your sources draw a clear distinction here. Senior ICs focus on technical coherence across teams. The EM's primary focus is the health, performance, and delivery of their specific team or group of teams.
More focused on the people and process, removing blockers.
Exactly. Nurturing the individuals, their growth, their careers, ensuring team processes are effective, shielding the team from noise, unblocking impediments, translating org goals into team context, managing stakeholders, getting the team what it needs to succeed, enabling the team unit.
Okay, and there's often a tech lead role mentioned too. How does that fit in?
Yeah, the tech lead is typically defined within a specific team, often a senior engineer on that team. Their focus is owning the local technical execution for that team's work.
So guiding design for their features, breaking down tasks, ensuring quality within the team.
Right. Leading code reviews, making sure the team's specific deliverables are technically sound. They're deep in the day-to-day tech of their team, while the staff plus ICs have that broader cross-team technical scope.
So staff plus for broad technical connection, EMs for team enablement, tech leads for local technical execution, distinct focuses.
Complementary focuses.
Yeah.
And the huge takeaway from your sources is these roles must be intentional,
Me-
meaning their responsibilities, their scope, their expected impact need to be clearly defined, communicated, and understood by everyone. You can't just hand out titles.
What happens if you do? Just title inflation.
Title inflation with no impact, as your sources put it. People get the title, but if the org doesn't really understand what a staff engineer does differently than a senior, or how a tech lead and EM work together,
Or if they don't have the actual mandate or influence to do their job.
then they become ineffective. The cross-team connections don't happen. Tech debt piles up. Impediments linger. Teams don't reach their potential. Defining and empowering these roles is as vital as drawing the org chart itself. Structure is the frame. These roles provide the operational leadership.
That's a really strong point. The structure needs clear roles with clear purpose to actually function.
Absolutely fundamental.
Now, shifting gears a bit, how does structure need to adapt to the changing environment of work? Your sources specifically call out remote first and global teams.
Yeah, it's super relevant today. Moving to distributed work changes the game. It breaks a lot of the assumptions baked into traditional co-located structures.
How so? What are the new demands on structure when people aren't in the same office?
Several key things jump out from your sources. First, communication defaults to async. Those quick hallway chats, desk drive-bys, the context you absorb just by being there. Con.
So information sharing has to be much more deliberate.
Has to be. Heavy reliance on writing, documented decisions, focused, scheduled syncs. If your old structure relied on osmosis, it breaks. Information needs to be explicit, written down, discoverable.
Okay, async communication is one. What else?
Leadership has to be way more explicit. You can't rely on presence or informal chaps to convey strategy, context, expectations. Decisions, the why behind them, priorities, goals, all need clear, repeated communication through channels everyone can access.
Over-communicating becomes essential.
Pretty much. Ambiguity that might get smoothed over in person becomes a major blocker remotely. And third, tooling becomes critical.
Yeah.
Project management tools, collaboration docs, chat, video conferencing, they're not just nice-to-haves anymore. They're the operating system of the distributed org.
Right, they replace the physical space and interactions. Your source mentioned a case study, a remote company that adapted.
Yeah, they recognized they needed to deliberately rebuild some of those informal connections. They started open architecture hours.
What were those?
Dedicated, regular time slots. Anyone could join to discuss designs, ask questions about shared systems, get input. Not mandatory, but an intentional ritual to foster that shared understanding and prevent silos forming in isolation.
Like a virtual whiteboard session or water cooler for tech talk?
Kind of, yeah.
Hmm.
And they also did things like rotating squad leads, using temporary working groups for cross-cutting stuff, spreading leadership and knowledge more widely, preventing silos.
So the takeaway for remote orgs isn't just keep the old structure but do it on Zoom.
Definitely not. The sources emphasize distributed orgs often need more clarity, more explicit process, more intentional rituals than co-located ones.
Because the informal glue is weaker.
Exactly. You have to proactively design structures and practices to ensure information flows, decisions are clear, people feel connected and aligned despite the distance. Remote work doesn't mean less structure. It means more intentional structure designed for distributed work.
That's crucial. You have to be much more deliberate about connection and clarity.
You really do.
Okay, so even with smart structures, adapting for remote, sometimes things still feel broken. And that often leads to the dreaded R word, the reorg.
Ah, yes, the reorg.
Your sources offer some perspective here. When is it actually needed? And maybe more importantly, when is it not the answer?
It's a big deal, right? Reorgs consume energy, create uncertainty, hit morale. Your sources say, yes, sometimes necessary, but often overused. Or used for the wrong reasons, like a knee-jerk reaction.
Like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic?
That's a great analogy for a bad reorg. But your sources do give signals that suggest the problem might actually be structural. Where the team boundaries reporting lines, ownership is the root cause.
Okay, what are those signals?
One clear one. Genuinely unclear ownership. Stuff constantly falling through the cracks because nobody knows who owns feature X or service Y or maintaining library Z. Accountability is just gone.
If everyone thinks it's someone else's job, it's no one's job.
Pretty much. Another big signal. Delivery slows down across the board. Not just one team struggling, but the whole engineering org feels sluggish. That often points to systemic issues, messy dependencies, structural bottlenecks, coordination breakdown that a structural change might fix.
So it's an org-wide efficiency problem, not just team performance.
Right. And a third signal, pervasive decision paralysis. Everyone complains, no one decides. Decisions get stuck, endlessly debated, punted. Because mandates are unclear, too many stakeholders, the structure just doesn't empower effective decision-making.
Unclear ownership, system-wide slowdowns, decision paralysis, those sound like potential structural problems. But you said reorgs are often misused. What's the big warning?
The absolute critical warning from your sources. Don't use a reorg to fix fundamental leadership or vision problems.
So if the strategy is unclear or managers aren't effective...
Changing the org chart won't fix that. If leadership isn't providing direction or coaching teams or building psychological safety, shuffling boxes doesn't address the root cause.
The problems will just reappear in the new structure.
Exactly. Those issues need different interventions. Leadership development, strategy work, cultural change, maybe even personnel changes. A reorg can't magically create good leadership or a compelling vision. It optimizes flow within a context. It doesn't create the context.
So the takeaway is be really diagnostic about reorgs.
Extremely thoughtful. Don't just react to pain. Do it when you have a clear hypothesis. Changing the structure is the best way to achieve a specific scaling goal, like enabling a new product line, improving platform leverage, fixing clear ownership gaps, breaking systemic bottlenecks. Reorgs are costly. Use them strategically, not as a default fix or a way to dodge harder conversations.
Requires honestly assessing the real problem, not just the symptoms.
Definitely.
Okay, as we wrap this up, there's a final really powerful message threading through your source material. It's that structure can't be static. It has to evolve.
That's the ultimate reality, isn't it? The structure that worked for 20 engineers finding product market fit, it's almost certainly not the right one for 500 engineers scaling to millions of users or launching new products.
The needs change, the challenges change, communication needs change.
Everything changes as you grow. So treating structure as a one-time thing you set up early on, that's just asking for trouble later.
So it's not fix it and forget it, it's manage and iterate.
Precisely. And your sources suggest ways to build this discipline of ongoing review. One is regularly revisit team boundaries and dependencies. Map them out.
See if these still make sense.
Yeah. Are the interfaces logical? Are dependencies clear? Have new overlaps or gaps emerged as missions evolved? Are teams stepping on toes? Getting blocked? Is critical stuff falling into an ownership void?
Makes sense. What else?
Define what good looks like. For teams, and for those key roles, staff plus EMs, tech leads, not rigid metrics, but clear expectations for behavior, collaboration, outcomes within your structure. How's it supposed to work?
Setting expectations for how the structure functions in practice.
Exactly. And maybe most practically, make structure review a regular discipline. Your sources suggest doing it maybe twice a year.
Like a strategic health check for the org design itself?
Kind of. It forces the leadership conversations. Is the current structure still enabling us? Or is it becoming an impediment? Before the pain gets so bad, you need a massive disruptive reorg.
And that leads right into the final thought your sources leave us with, tying it all together.
Yeah, the concluding insight is really powerful. Your org structure. It's way more than an HR chart. It fundamentally shapes how work happens.
Dictating collaboration, communication, speed.
All of it.
Yeah.
Velocity. It profoundly impacts how people grow. Mentorship, learning, career paths.
Right.
And because of those two things, it ultimately dictates how your product scales. Whether you can actually build, deliver, and operate complex systems for more users.
It brings structure right down to daily work, careers, and product success.
It underscores that designing and evolving structure isn't a side task. It's a critical, ongoing leadership function in any scaling tech org, because it's so tied to operational effectiveness and people development.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, pulling from your sources. From Conway's Law and why structure matters.
There's specific models like Spotify, platform teams.
Navigating autonomy versus alignment, the importance of key roles.
Adapting for remote work, when and when not to reorg.
And landing on structure as an evolving process.
And the core message seems clear. No single magic structure exists. No perfect blueprint.
But there are principles.
Universal principles, smart approaches, balancing autonomy and alignment, leveraging platforms, combining product focus and craft, defining roles intentionally, being explicit in communication, especially when distributed. Those are the keys.
It's about taking these ideas, understanding the dynamics, and applying them thoughtfully, continuously, to your specific context, your company, your stage, your culture.
And bringing it back to you, the listener, who provided this great material. As you reflect on your own org, are you seeing those warning signs? The duplication, inconsistency, endless debates, fuzzy ownership.
How much of your structure was deliberate design versus, well, just happening?
And let's leave you with that final provocative thought from the sources. If structure shapes how work gets done and how people grow, what does your current structure implicitly prioritize through its very design?
And is that prioritization what you actually want for your teams, for your product's future? Something to definitely mull over as you navigate your own scaling journey.
Indeed. It's a complex challenge, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding these principles is the vital first step.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope pulling these insights from your source material has been valuable for you.
Until the next time.